Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Serious, eerie towns, disappearing diners, and creepy gas stations. What's your true, unexplained story of being in a place that shouldn't exist? Episode 11. I was visiting some friends off of Township Line Road near the ridiculous neighborhood of West Clay. We found a small, forested area and followed a small overgrown trail for about a quarter of a mile, and we found an abandoned house. All of it was falling apart and it was dilapidated with one side entirely collapsed. There were strange trinkets littered everywhere and lots of broken beer bottles. Naturally, we went inside. Inside the house there was some furniture left and some paintings, and all of it was very dark and cursed looking. The staircase was broken, and so we had to stack objects to reach the second floor, and in one of the rooms were an old, weathered map covering the whole wall, and all of the place names were written in Cyrillic, and there were books written in Cyrillic too. We had to leave early because a nail went through my friend's foot. I went by this year and the woods were gone and replaced with a new neighborhood development. I used to work security on a truck hauling explosives. So it wasn't only me that seen this, the driver of the truck did too. On Highway 16 I think it was, between Prince George Alberta border, we both seen these rather large and ancient looking gravestones, some dark some gray, all entwined in vine, just in the bush off the side of the highway. We looked at each other, wide-eyed. We knew we both seen it. There was no pull-off or markings or anything, so we were unable to stop and look for it. So we kept our eyes peeled on the way back, but to no avail. Never saw it. We went though there 2 trips a week every week for more than 2 years, never seen it after that, never seen it before. But we both saw it. We talked about it. I got Google Maps tracking me and wasn't able to pinpoint location. We talked to a forest ranger that works those parts and he said he's never seen or heard of such a place. But we both saw it. We did. There's an abandoned village built around a mental hospital about 25 minutes up the road from Maine. Bangor Village, Scotland. The place is massive and still in good shape. A few friends and I managed to get into the old school. The place was a bit tore up with a few holes in the roof except for one classroom that was in pristine condition. One of the boys swears he heard a kid laughing. I've watched far too many horror movies to investigate that. There's a decrepit building in my town next to the car wash. No one ever leaves or enters and there are holes in every window. However, there is a reinforced door to this building with an electronic lock. There's also a locked chain fence on the side of the building stopping you from getting either side of it. There are security cameras that look out of date and seem to have been semi-hidden on the corners of the building. I would assume that building was abandoned if it were not for the green lights that remain on in the building 100% of the time that I can tell. Yes, I know the implications that it could be being used to grow cannabis, but this is a warehouse-sized building. Always wondered who owns it and what it's actually being used for. For 34, my friend heard about this abandoned farmhouse in this little town not far from where we live. Outside of Toronto there are cities and towns in both directions, but you can go from dense urban concrete jungles to very rural areas in minutes. This town was one such rural area. So, the story we knew about this abandoned farmhouse was these people had gone to check it out one night and had seen a ghostly woman in the upstairs window. That was what we were going to see for ourselves. The journey there had a creepy, yet sort of funny incident. We knew the general area this house was located in, but not the exact location. We ended up taking a wrong turn down this little dirt road that was attached to the off-ramp of the highway. It led under an overpass to what appeared to be some beach area. As we drove around this curved road, there was a super bright light that appeared. My friend tried to pull to the side to let whatever it was pass, but the light veered into our path. Now we were a little freaked out. We still couldn't see what the light was attached to. We got the feeling we had gotten ourselves in a dangerous situation. Turned out it were the cops. The cops started asking us what we were doing there. The one cop said people only go down to this area to do drugs. There are a hooker murder grounds a few kilometers away from where I live. Yikes. Anyway, the cop noticed there were no hookers with us, so they went with drugs. I was asked to step out of the car. I was searched and questioned. The cop finally asked what we were doing there with the intention of actually listening to our answer. The first time they asked, it was more in a rhetorical manner, not giving us a chance to answer. So I was behind the car and I decided to be honest, even if it made us sound nuts, and told the cop we were on our way to this haunted farmhouse. He looked at me like you would have expected him to look at someone that had just said that while standing on the driveway to hooker murder wonderland in the middle of the night. Oh boy. He then goes to the car and asks my friend. Thankfully my friend tells him the same thing. The other cop hears him mention the haunted farmhouse. His demeanor instantly changes from stern cop mode, and he laughs. Oh, you guys are way off. You need to get back on the highway, get off at exit X, go up the road a little, and turn left. Can't miss it. Thanks, officer. Of course, after this incident we asked about trespassing. They said it was, but as long as we didn't cause a ruckus, they wouldn't bother us. And away we went. Back on the journey. We pulled up to the place. The house is in rough shape. There are toys all around the outside. Like those toy kitchen sets and stuff like that. Those set along a dilapidated house in the overgrown grass was like something out of a horror movie. We located the window in question. The whole reason we had went there. I should point out here that on the way up, we stopped at a store and bought a bunch of batteries for our camera. This was like 2007 or so, cell phone cameras weren't yet a ubiquitous item. We put brand new batteries in the camera and our flashlights before we got out of the car. We shine the flashlight up at the window, but do not see anything. One of us, I can't remember who at this point, decided to take a photo of the window. We were standing about 30 feet from the house, still standing on the gravel driveway. When the photo is taken, the flash lights up the window and room in a way the flashlight didn't. And there she was. The lady. Standing in the window like we were told. I must admit. I went instantly from a tough guy in the back half of his 20s to a hysteric 9-year-old girl. I jumped, and then ran behind the car. I was freaking out. My friend wasn't doing much better. After a moment, my composure was regained. I took a second photo. She is still there. But I wasn't scared this time. I was more intrigued. I took another one. Still there. But now I have an idea what it is we were seeing. It was a mannequin. The kind people use it for tailoring dresses. I went from being scared to annoy to amuse. Then we felt comfortable enough to go inside. It was trashed in there. Kids I guess have been partying in here. Graffiti everywhere. Holes in the walls, damage in every room. My buddy went down into the basement. I wouldn't go down there. The stairs looked junky and no way was I getting stuck in the basement of some rural home that is haunted by a mannequin if they collapsed. He seemed fine with going down there, nonetheless. Now, I mentioned the brand new batteries. They had been in the camera for like 15 minutes. Battery indicator was full. As soon as he went downstairs, the camera died. The batteries were empty. That was about the time when we decided our career as paranormal investigators was going to be a short-lived one. We got back in the car and headed home. The next interesting thing was that a week or two later we were going somewhere else and happened to pass that house again along the way. The house was no longer there. All that remained was a smoking pile of rubble. Not sure how it burnt down, kids I would guess. Or maybe the battery draining mannequin did it. I was at a rest area just outside of a tunnel with my family. It's probably around 1 in the morning. We always stopped at this particular rest area whenever we traveled so we weren't worried about anything. I was about 11 or 12 listening to music as I got out with my mom. My music randomly stopped playing as soon as I stepped out of the car. I look at my mom and she's staring at something on the other side of the rest area. When I look, I see a group of people with black capes looking things with hoods up under the only street lamp in the area. They're not moving at all, freakishly still, but the truck they were around had a pile of black trash bags in the bed. My mom grabs me, so I look away and back at her. When I turn back towards the truck, all of the people are gone. The trash bags are still there but there are no people. My mom hurriedly got us back in the car and we drive away. To this day we have no idea who those hooded people were, and every time we go back to the rest area we bring it back up and wonder. 12. There is one place that shouldn't exist, but still does. Deep in Asbury Woods in my hometown there was a great oak. So old and mighty those trees didn't grow around it for a good 10 to 15 feet. I don't quite recall where I heard the story, but apparently one day someone climbed all the way to the top and smoked a cigarette. That single cigarette caused the tree to burst into flames, but it still stands to this day. Even though this mighty tree is barely half of what it used to be, no tree will grow in the circle around it. Now on the path back out there was a private property sign. If you ignored it and went through these paths only taking the rightmost option, you'd find a rolling meadow that was extremely out of place. Majestic as hell though. 13. One time I was driving from Arizona to Oklahoma. I reached Texas and realized I was gonna need gas soon. My phone had no service for maps, middle of nowhere Texas, so I started looking for signs of the next town. Let it be said this was around 2 or 3 a.m. So I saw the sign for the next town and start planning to stop there, only to realize that once I got to the town it was completely abandoned. The houses I could see from the streets were all boarded up, as was the gas station and what I think was general store. This was not a big town, so everything in the town you could see from the main road. So being able to find no gas, I stopped at said abandoned gas station to try and look on and see if my phone could get enough signal for a map so that I could look for the next town with gas. When I look up and see a person had started walking towards my car out of nowhere. I threw him in drive and took off, never to look back. I've made that same drives multiple times since then, even a few times during daylight, and have not been able to find that town. I wanted to see if there were any actual people who lived there, thinking maybe I could have not seen other houses since it was dark. But no. No matter how hard I try, I cannot find that town again. 14. Same trip/route traveling through Texas Panhandle. We stopped in a little town for breakfast at a dinner. When I went to pay I found they didn't take plastic and the closest it was 40 miles the other way. Guy near the cashier said, "Big city folk," and threatened to call the sheriff in case we ran. Creepy times. 15. I have a friend who was from Nova Scotia originally. We got to talk about scary stories and he told me that near where he lived there were abandoned military bunkers with tunnels that networked underground along the coast. It was a local attraction that was rumored to be haunted due to a girl who had died during a party inside the tunnels. Sounded a lot like an urban legend, but the story was she overdosed and was thrown in the fire by the people in the party who were also messed up on drugs. So, my friend decided to check it out with his buddy. It was grown in and covered in graffiti. He was saying that going into the deeper, darker parts of the tunnels was chilling and uncomfortable. It was cold and dark and there was graffiti all over the walls with that girl's name written everywhere. The wind blowing from the coast made all sorts of noise coming in. They finally left because it was getting too creepy, and when they got back outside to his friend's car there was X's written all over the dust on it. Needless to say, they got out of there pretty quick. 16. When I was young, before school age, I would go to a nursery that just did childcare/learning to count and write, normal stuff. They had different rooms for each age group, and although I don't remember this, my mom has told me that whenever somebody tried to take me into the baby room I would scream and cry and absolutely refuse to go in, so they had to put me in the toddler room a year early instead. I can, however, remember all of after the first year, when I was maybe 3/2 really clearly. I can remember rooms and playgrounds and what I wore, and this is where it starts to get creepy. The nursery had a playground outside, pretty small with normal equipment and surrounded by a brick wall. I can remember so clearly that a few times a week I would go through a gate into a garden with a house with an elderly couple in, and I can remember them once giving me cookies. I can remember the house and the gate and walking into it and out of it so clearly it's insane. I told my mom about it when I was about 13 and she said there never was a house with a gate into the playground. There weren't any houses near there, and especially not with gates leading into a closed playground, nor would anybody let me go into the garden even if it was there. But I'm 100% sure I went. I remember it so well and it's so real I know it happened. 17. I did a bicycle trip across the country back in 2005 and I ended up cycling through a deserted town, I think somewhere in Georgia/Alabama. It was late in the day, and nothing happened, but going through an empty town on a bike was pretty intense. You could hear your pedaling echoing off the walls because there was no traffic or noise. There was still glass in the storefront display windows, so it wasn't completely run down yet. It was just like everyone decided to pack up and leave. I always wondered about that place. 18. Once I was backpacking with some friends in central Kentucky, and my buddy Adam had a several generations back blunt, which he had been saving for a special occasion. It was my day to trip, we did one at a time so the other two could trips it, and at one point we 3-stoned them, of course get lost, and stumble across an old creepy cabin. This was a textbook creepy cabin, clearly built by hand, pretty deep in the woods. This is not that you expect to actually be seeing when you're tripping in the woods. It looks abandoned and decrepit, so Adam goes, an old blunt for an old house, and we head inside. Broken furniture, several blacked out windows, creepy pseudo-religious thing scrawled all over the walls. Also, some beer cans and other party detritus. We smoked that old blunt in that old house down to the roach. I was barely holding my stuff together. I have no idea if the other dudes were as freaked out as I was, but eventually somebody says, "I think I heard a noise," and we lit out. We wandered a little longer until we came upon a little gravel road with a house, a lady sitting on a porch with like 80 dogs in her yard, and they are all loudly suspicious of us. Beyond there, we find 2 big good old boys laying gravel, for the county or whatever. My friends explain our predicament, and they're listening, and I try to join the conversation, and spout absolute gibberish for about 30 seconds. They stared at me like I got honorable mention at the traumatic brain injury but trying his best, awards. My friends make some hasty excuses, and the rednecks point us back toward the trail. Adam went to scout. Part of me is a crazy stressed because we might still be lost, and we might get murdered, and we might have summoned a demon in that cabin, and I'm fat and exhausted and was not prepared for this. Part of my doesn't care because the clouds are dancing and it's beautiful, and the trees close around me and totally enveloped me in nature. After a few minutes we went to find Adam, who had not returned, to see that he had found the trail, and was sitting at the base of the sign smoking another blunt. When we asked him, no, and he just shook his head, and gestured with the blunt towards the signpost, which pointed up a steep incline, and was emblazoned with 2 words, "more difficult." Reposted from a comment I made last week on r/trees. Too late to the party and nobody will care, but I love this story and that terrifying cabin. 19. My parents have a lake house out in East Texas, and to get there, you exit the interstate into a rural, small town. There are some restaurants and shops and gas stations around the exit ramp. One time I decided to explore and drove a little way down the frontage road. There was an interesting Western-themed store that sold neat trinkets and knick-knacks and some women's clothing. We would go out there often, but I never saw that shop again, and I know exactly where it would have been. The historical downtown is creepy too. There's nobody in any of the establishments. It's completely dead. 20. I have 2 that I can remember, The first was when some friends and I were driving around southeast Nebraska/northwest Missouri, and we crossed the Missouri River into Nebraska. The bridge going over probably wouldn't have fit a wider car and semi, let alone two semis, but it was supposed to be a two-way highway. All metal bridge, and was just creepy going across. As soon as we hit the other side it said what town we were in, but all you could see to the left was what seemed like a bar and a gravel parking lot. There were a couple of houses that weren't fully visible because of trees, and there was a road that took a sharp turn that I would assume went into the town proper. Anyway, we were craped out just enough to turn around in this parking lot and head back. Throughout our entire time in the parking lot, it was decent sized, probably enough to fit 30 to 40 cars minimum. Anyone that was standing outside stood still and looked as us circle around and out. Didn't move, didn't wave, didn't do anything but stare until we got back on the road to head out of town. Later found out there was supposedly a cult that resided there and killed a person by surrounding their truck and shot the person inside with shotguns. The second would have been on a road trip through Arkansas. Southwest of Little Rock we took some weird highway and drove on a highway where there was no ditch. Just highway and trees that were maybe 5 to 10 feet away from the highway, with stumps that looked recently cut. So, it was fairly dark even though it was daytime. Anyway, we turned a corner and suddenly come to a town that just seemed to show complete opposites. Like one house would be completely decrepit while there was another standing 10 feet away that seemed immaculate. Then we came across a playground that was fenced off and had barbed wire over the top of it. Then as we turned another corner there was a kid riding a big wheel in the middle of the street and just didn't move out of the way. Looked back at us and just kept pedaling. He was a black kid, and considering it wasn't bright out despite it being daytime, it was just very unexpected and not easy to see right at the moment, though very easy to see once he was noticed. We continued on and we found the downtown portion where there were probably about 15 people sitting beside the highway. Not to hitchhike, but they looked like they were homeless. There looked like a biker bar kind of. There were only a couple of motorcycles in front of it, no other vehicles. Then as we leave we follow the highway through a turn and pass what looked like a run-down or possibly closed-off rec center. 21. About a month ago a photo of a beach came across my feed. I've dreamt of this place. I've never been a beach person. As a basic OG goth who lives on an island, that's saying something. It was so clear from my dream, down to the house across the water, that I reached out to the photographer. He said he was heading back out that weekend and he'd take more pics and send them to me, but that was a month ago. He's young, I'm old. He probably thinks I'm a troll or just a person screwing we both him. I'm not. I look every day to see if he's sent me pics. I'm positive there's some sort of divot or clearing on the other side that I'm supposed to plant in. His photo brings me peace but longing at the same time. Maybe it only exists in my heart so my head can go on. 22. Driving from Jacksonville, Florida to Savannah, Georgia. If you've ever driven that stretch of 95, there's not too much there. And if you have to go, you usually stop at one of the larger truck stops or rest areas. Well, I had to use the bathroom really badly and told my husband to get off at the next exit no matter what. Super rural area, nothing but a gas station and a guy selling peaches. Go into the really old gas station and ask about the bathroom. This older, rather large lady was in the back of the store and opened the door to the restroom. There are 2 toilets, on opposite walls, no stalls. The older lady goes in and says, "Come on, I'm going, you can go too." I look at my husband. He looks at me. We are nope out. 23. I was going to the beach in South Alabama with my wife, the girlfriend, and some friends a few years ago. The gaps took us onto a back road where all the trees were burned along with the houses. The road was about 3 miles long. All that was left standing were the brick chimneys, except the once house at the end. It was at least a 100-years-old Victorian mansion. Next to it was a huge monument/shrine of a cross with baby angels sculpted into it. I'm talking 25 feet tall and 10 feet across solid stone. At the base was a cemetery with at least 50 stones, all of them being children. On the way back we tried to find the road again. We turned around several times to where it should have been, but it was gone. We still try to find it every time we head to the beach. 24. Somewhere south of Clarksdale, deep in the Mississippi Delta, coming home from my buddy's cabin. Late at night headed back to the Memphis area, and we stopped at this gas station out on one of these tree islands. If you have been to the Delta you'll know what I'm talking about. It is so flat you can see for miles around like you're on water, and the only trees are around buildings and look like islands. Here at this station, we stop, go inside to pay, can't pay at pump, really old, and I immediately feel weird. There's hardly any food or supplies on the shelves, the one cooler is empty, and half the lights are off in the store. Dude at the counter just stares at me and doesn't break as I walk to the counter. I gave him $25 and he says nothing. As I begin to leave he says he likes my Nixon watch. This would be a normal compliment except for the fact that it was an unseasonably cold spring day, and I was wearing a heavy coat and gloves, so he would have had no way to see my watch. Soon after, a large man appears from behind the shelves in the dark corner of the store and begins walking toward me. I quickly go back to my car and yell at my friends to start it, but neither of the men comes outside. They just stare at us through the windows. We uncomfortably waited a minute in the car. Then proceed to quickly fuel up and drive away. Back about a year later, same road and no sign of the place or the rest of the island. 25. Maybe someone can help solve this geographical mystery for some of my friends and me. When I was in the Coast Guard, I served on an icebreaker. During one trip, had to sail around the southern tip of Greenland. But we didn't go around the complete tip of the country, we cut through the bottom, through a fjord. We spent all day going through is kind of short cut through the very bottom southern tip of Greenland. It spent all day in this fjord. It was gorgeous, but it was very desolate. There was on the land there was literally nothing but dirt and air. As we were traversing this fjord, we came around a corner, and inexplicably there was a town. Just all by itself, maybe 20 or 30 houses. Next to the water. In the middle of absolutely nowhere. That was about 15 years ago. Since then my friends, my former shipmates, and I have tried to find that town on Google Earth but can't find it. Can anyone here help with solving that mystery of that bizarre town? 26. I have only 2 words for you: West Milford. If you have never read Weird NJ or heard of West Milford, New Jersey, I would suggest you queue up your internets. I grew up in West Milford, so between abandoned military bases, circus camps, Ringling Brothers winters there, inbred mountain people, ghosts, and abandoned mental asylums, West Milford is the equivalent of a hell mouth. Enjoy. 27. I've wanted to share this on here forever, but it doesn't follow any subs rules. I'm curious if anyone has any insight. This happened to 2 buddies of mine while we were all on the same trip. I have been suggesting they post it to re-edit for years, but I'm going to do it myself. Teller at bottom. Full story, summer of 2012. I, my best friend from college, and his little brother all decided to do the Transamerica Trail together. This is a well-traveled, semi-famous bicycle route which connects Yorktown, Virginia to an Astoria, Oregon. I'm from Minnesota and they're from Texas. At the time we were living in these respective places and had planned to fly to Yorktown to begin the trip together. Unfortunately, I had been hit by a car while riding my bicycle about 3 weeks before we had planned to meet. As a result, my departure date had to be delayed a little bit, and I planned to simply leave from Minnesota on my bike by myself and connect with them in Pueblo, Colorado, and they would stick to the original plan. This is what ended up happening. During the trip we camped around 50% of the time, stayed with designated hosts 40% of the time, an organization called Warm Showers, LOL, and was our go-to for this. It was couch surfing for touring cyclists, strangers who host people along the route, and we stayed in churches the remainder of the time. This was one of the most rewarding aspects of the trip, needing to figure out where we were going to spend the night every time we called it for the day. It was our intention from the beginning to never pay for shelter or campsite, almost becoming a point of principle, and at the end of the trip a point of pride. During the trip we camped around 50% of the time, stayed with designated hosts 40% of the time, an organization called Warm Showers, LOL, and was our go-to for this. It was couch surfing for touring cyclists, strangers who host people along the route, and we stayed in churches the remainder of the time. This was one of the most rewarding aspects of the trip, needing to figure out where we were going to spend the night every time we called it for the day. It was our intention from the beginning to never pay for shelter or campsite, almost becoming a point of principle, and at the end of the trip a point of pride. It resulted in some of the best experiences we had, and we slept in some very cool places. I actually have more than one story I could share in this thread, and one strange warm showers experience. Anyway, in order to achieve the goal of never paying for lodging, we did have to break some minor laws from time to time, but always being as respectful as possible. The only time we ever paid was for a campsite in Yellowstone. We liked churches because they were safe, eerie feeling, and typically had amenities like a shower and a kitchen. We stayed at 7 total, some known hosts, 1 we just slept outside of, and 3 of which we entered, well, surreptitiously. This was easy to do because the majority of the route was rural and these churches almost always have an easy-to-find, unlocked door. The most memorable was the Episcopal Chapel of the Transfiguration in Teton National Park. This story is about one in rural Missouri. I know the name of the town but am not ready to reveal it because I do not want to implicate this church of anything serious. Mostly for our own protection and theirs. So, my 2 buddies are in this town and a thunderstorm is brewing, so they decided to call it relatively early. Thunderstorms can be pretty gnarly in Missouri. Doing some scouting, they find this church pretty well off the beaten path. Seems quiet and safe, so they bum around the area for a bit until it gets later, and they feel comfortable going back. Entering the church is easy, the place seems like it'll do the trick. The storm is escalating outside. The place is not air-conditioned and, for those who don't know, it gets really hot and humid in Missouri. It's early July at this time, and so they decide to scour the place for a fan. They're going through closets, etc. Everything about this place seems pretty standard. My buddy will then notices that to the right of the fridge in the kitchen is an open space of about 24, stuffed into it are some brooms, and behind the brooms are a door. He figures it's just another closet. They pull out the brooms and open the door. Will said after opening the door he almost immediately had the feeling of having found something that was not intended to be found. The door opens onto a staircase going into the basement. The weird thing is that the door is very narrow, you had to turn sideways to get through comfortably, but the stairs beyond are normal. It seemed as if the stairs were a part of the original design, but at some point someone changed the door to be more discreet. They kind of hung back for a bit to feel certain that nobody was going to be coming by the church any longer that night, then they decide to check it out. The first thing about the basement that's weird is its uncanny quality of feeling like a movie set in the 70s. And everything is child-sized. Small desks pushed into corners of the rooms. A short drinking fountain. Everything's in good condition except for layers of dust. For some reason it all feels wrong to them. Then they discover the room in question. Lab-like, clean, obviously in current use. They turn the fluorescent lights on and look at long, stainless steel tables. Stretching down the full length of the center of these tables are troughs. In the troughs is a thick, dark, almost tar-like substance. They are terrified, and immediately feel how vulnerable to being trapped in this basement they are. They get out. It's pitch black and raining outside, so they can't leave the church. They make everything seem as undisturbed as possible and take off at 30 minutes before sunrise. We have a lot of great stories from this trip, but this is the one we tell the most. We all have since regularly checked the news for that town to see if there are any busts, nothing yet. Any ideas? 28. Ionk. 28. I once went to Whitby on the North Yorkshire coast. It's where Dracula came to land in England in the Bram Stoker novel, and while the skies were clear on the North Yorkshire moors, as soon as we drove into Whitby there was the thickest fog I've ever seen. You couldn't see more than 10 feet clearly. I think they call it a sea mal. It was the most otherworldly place I'd ever seen. 29. Not really creepy, but I once stopped for gas and a shot late lunch in a little town in very rural Tennessee. Everyone seemed to be wearing bandanas and wife beaters, covered in tattoos, and missing teeth and driving with pit bulls in the bed of their pickups, and I could not understand them. And I've spent some time in fairly rural Georgia. It's not like I didn't have exposure to southern accents. They were not hostile and minded their business, but I saw many sideways stares and got a very strong feeling that I would be better off get out of there before the locals had a few beers after work. Just not a good vibe at all. And yet it's perfectly possible I was being wrong and prejudiced. 30. Several years ago, my brother and I were off reading in the Appalachians. At the top of a really rough trail there was a very rundown house with a big school bus behind it. Even at the best of times I don't see a school bus being able to make a climb at the incline the mountain is. My best guess was a helicopter dropped it off. 31. I once managed to get into a disused floor of a parking garage in Manhattan, and found myself locked in. I could hear rats and/or people in the large dimly lit space. I found a locked door that was loose enough I could force the lock and got back to my car. I felt like I had escaped and they found his rodent-eaten corpse weeks later situation. The garage was in some big old mostly windowless brick building, like an old armory. But I have not been able to locate the building since then. 32. Maybe a little late, but there was an old house that was across from my friend's high school. Nobody had owned the house for years and of course kids told ghost stories of going there and seeing things. The usual. So, one day we decided to go. It's all old and torn apart but we can barely get into the house, so we decided to go to a little garage/shed thing. It was filled with mattresses, tables and just trash. But the main attraction was the barn that obviously hadn't been touched in years. Dust on everything, I mean everything. It was almost surreal to be in. You can tell not many kids had even made it this far on the property. But we kept going until we heard a loud crash from inside the house. Mind you, the house and the barn are about 20 yards away from each other. We sprinted to our car and got the hell out. We looked back to the house before we turned on the road and nobody was visible, but we were still scared as hell. 33. I was coming back from the Philippines with my family. We took a plane to get back and I was seated right next to the window. As we were lowering down close enough to the ground I could see details of things like fire hydrants and small fences in a normal-looking town. The thing was, there were no people, just rows and rows of houses, that was it. Also, I checked a map online of towns and I could not find the town near the airport, so really I was shocked. 34. In 8th grade my family and another family rented a cabin off this place called Lake Glenville in the mountains of North Carolina. It was a long time ago, but from what I remember, underneath the lake used to be a town that sat under a dam. At some point, they decided to evacuate the town and flood so if you go snorkeling or scuba diving in the lake you can see remnants of old houses and stuff. I didn't do it myself because I was young and afraid, but I feel like you'd see some pretty creepy stuff.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.